ومسؤولي سياسة خارجي أو حزبي للسويد. I would like to welcome Lena Clemens to talk to us today in the conference. She's from the Sweden Green Party, and she's in charge of the foreign affairs for the party. Okay.
Thank you. Coming from Sweden, I like to speak Swedish, but I can't do so because you can't understand me, so I have to read out my speech in English instead. And first I want to give you the regards from Lotta Hedström and also from Jabbar Amin. I think some of you are friends of me, and they are friends of me. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak at your conference and participate in your campaign for a referendum for independence of Kurdistan. I represent the Green Party of Sweden, and on behalf of my party, I wish you all great success with this conference and with the campaign. Let me start by telling you something about Sweden and our history. How it happened that we lost about 1/3 of our territory because one big party wanted to be an independent and free state. Sweden was 100 years ago a much bigger country than it is today. In 1814, we had won Norway from Denmark, and Sweden-Norway was united in a union with a common king. But Norway didn't want to be a part of Sweden. They felt special with their own languages. They even had 2 languages and their own culture. So the Norwegians immediately started to fight for independence. It took them 91 years. The struggle was completed with a referendum where 99% of the Norwegians wanted to separate from Sweden. And in 1905, Norway was established as a free and independent country. I have learned by reading that the Kurdish people was promised to establish an independent state in 1920 after the First World War. It's a promise which is not yet fulfilled, and it is 84 years ago. If your fight will be no longer than the Norwegians, you have just 7 years left, and I hope that your independence will come in that period of 7 years. During the last 50 years, more than 100 new states have been founded. That means 2 new states every year. More and more peoples have liberated themselves from colonialism, occupation, and submission. In every new decade, more states are born in spite of the argument that it would be impossible to do so. The reason why new states are born is because more peoples demand their national and democratic rights. The driving force behind the establishment of these new states has been the right to decide about their own future. For example, the Algerians wanted a free Algeria instead of being a French colony. The Baltic states wanted to have the right to decide about their future for themselves. They refused to be dominated by Russia. And the East Timorese people expressed their view through a national referendum that they didn't want to belong to Indonesia and instead wanted to create a new state. After a long struggle, they eventually reached their goal. These people's demand for independence and national sovereignty has been legitimate and was even supported by the UN Charter and international law. Despite this, many of the last half-century's new states have come true through armed struggle and massive protest, and not through dialogue and peaceful understanding and agreements. The main reason for this is that the respect for international law and human rights, unfortunately, is subordinated economic, strategic, and nationalistic interests by the oppressors. We, the Swedish Greens, have the opinion that the best democratic alternative in these kinds of conflicts is to have a UN-sanctioned referendum. By asking the people, you can get the answer of how they want to create their future and what kind of government they want to have. By a referendum, you can find out the will of the people. However, Before organizing the referendum, it's important to define and make clear some certain aspects. Talking about southern Kurdistan, I have learned that your proposal is that only the 4 or 5 million people who live in the southern Kurdistan will have the right to vote in this referendum. And then you have to specifically declare that everybody that now lives in the southern Kurdistan is welcome to do so even in the future. That's important. I think I will repeat this because I got some translation of your argument before this meeting started. I think it's very important to declare that everybody that now lives in the southern Kurdistan is welcome to do so even in the future. Among other important aspects that needs to be made clear before a referendum is the issue that all the alternatives must be crystal clear and easy to interpret. If you have too many alternatives and alternatives that are difficult to interpret, it may undermine the goal of the referendum. A third aspect is that the political actors in the region or country must declare before the referendum that they will honor the outcome of the referendum, whatever it may be. Even if the outcome of a referendum ought to be binding for the political parties, one cannot always be sure of that. Therefore, it is important to receive their pledges before the referendum is held. A fourth aspect is that the international community must clearly be involved in the referendum. It can contribute know-how and international experience, as well as sending election observers and help establish a dialogue between the involved political parties. I cannot stress this last part enough, because the international community can act as means of pressure to make sure that the outcome of the referendum will be honored. We are fully aware of that none of these questions I have mentioned is easy to agree upon, but these issues must be clarified if it should be worthwhile to hold a referendum. Therefore, it is extremely important that the Kurdish political parties in the southern Kurdistan work actively to solve these issues. A heavy responsibility rests upon the two large Kurdish political parties, Patriotic Union of Kurdistan and Kurdistan Democratic Party, to work for and prepare the grounds for the idea of a UN-sanctioned referendum. By not doing so, of tactical reasons, might be a mistake. It is necessary to speak openly of a referendum as a democratic alternative, even though it might upset neighboring countries or nationalistic or religious parties. The Swedish Green Party supports full-heartedly a UN-sanctioned referendum in the southern Kurdistan and in all other parts of Kurdistan. We think that the people of Kurdistan should have the same rights as peoples all over the world to decide over their own future. We have this position because people have a right to self-determination, and this is a fundamental basement in the green world view. If the Kurdish people's will can be realized through a federation or through its own independent state, it is up to the Kurdish people to decide. But it is extremely important that a free Kurdistan will be a state where it is good for everybody to live and where human rights are fully respected. We are definitely of the opinion that democratic peoples from all over the world should adjudge the people of Kurdistan the same right as they themselves want to enjoy, the right to form its own future, the right to self-government, and the right to sovereignty. Because of this reason, we have supported the struggle of the people of Kurdistan for democracy, peace, human rights, and national sovereignty through articles, conferences, resolutions in the Swedish Parliament, mainly made by Lotta Hedström, who visited you earlier, manifestations, etc. And we have tried to voice our support in all these ways. Our hopes are that more political parties, organizations, and people all over the world will support the struggle. And finally, let me remind you again of Sweden and Norway. Sweden was 100 years ago a much bigger country than it is today, because Norway didn't want to belong to us. But Norway did want to be it was, I have to repeat the last sentence, excuse me. I wanted to remind you of Sweden and Norway, how we separated. Sweden was 100 years ago a much bigger country than it is today because Norway belonged to us. But Norway didn't want to be a part of Sweden, so they struggled for independence. It took 91 years. But finally in 1905, Norway was established as a free and independent country. And I hope that your struggle will come to the same result after 91 years. And if that is so, you have just 7 years left. A referendum is a necessary part of a process leading to the fulfillment of the promises from the 1920s to the Kurdish people. We, the Swedish Greens, support your struggle and requests all democratic parties all over the world to do the same. Thank you. And